think this one is a calendar mistake, Jonathan.
Interesting. Good to know.
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
I think the invite too has two Zoom meeting links.
Oh.
One of them is wrong and one of them is the correct one. The top one is the location and it points to Cal's
Mhm.
personal meeting room. So someone should fix that in the calendar event.
Yeah, if you bring it up in the WGE end users Slack channel, yeah, just so we got somewhere written, because I won't remember that.
That's totally fair.
Monday morning, I can't remember my own name or where I live. So
yeah, I know. Jacques, are you? That's how you say your name, right?
Yep, you got it right.
Jacques. Perfect. Are you? Where are you based out of?
New York.
New York. Very nice. And where do you work? What's the where? Who keeps you who pays your salary? Gives you the opportunity to work on this stuff.
Who lets me stay in New York? Yeah, Shopify.
Yeah. Shopify. Oh, right. Because
yeah.
I remember you saying that before. Yeah. Okay, cool. And you're involved in the working in open source security stuff by Shopify, mostly around their supply chain stuff, or just everything.
No, mostly supply chain stuff. We've got a very large trust and security organization, as you would imagine, which focuses on all the other aspects of security.
And a decent bug bounty program from what I've heard too.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty decent. I mean, it's not an Apple iPhone remote code exploitation level, but it is pretty healthy payouts, and understandably, we got a lot of stuff to defend.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. Yeah. And so are you my brain? Monday morning it's not my time either.
No, not your forte.
No, I just figured I'd hop on here and see what was going on. So this meeting is not happening because of the holidays? Wait, yeah.
Well, so what I think happened 2 weeks ago on Monday at this time, there was an ad hoc meeting. Like we just had like a one-off. Yeah, and I think when it was scheduled, it was accidentally scheduled as recurring.
As it would be.
Yeah. So the recurring one occurred last Thursday. So I was surprised to see this on my calendar this morning. So I think we'll have to ask for it to get removed.
Okay. Well, that'll probably fix the personal meeting ID being added to this one too. Then. So. Yeah. Very fun. Very fun. Are you having fun? Are you enjoying this? I'm happily surprised with the Open Source Security Foundation and how this kind of I started joining 2 years ago, and it seems to have come into its own over the past bit of time, and that's been really nice to see.
It's evolved through a few phases. I think the next phase that's coming in the next year or two is the expansion of staff to provide full-time services for a variety of things. So there's sort of emerging proposals on the table. There's the help desk one I've done for securing software repos.
Yep.
There's the work that the education group is doing. Alpha Omega, of course, have their own sort of little hierarchy going. So I think
I can't imagine who they might be hiring.
Yeah. Neither.
No, I might be I'm finalizing a thing there. So
yes. So I guess we shouldn't publish this recording.
I know. Yeah. Well, we're almost there. Things, things are almost moving. Yeah. Oh yeah, this thing is recorded. All right. Yeah. All right, well, this is not actually a meeting, so we can just trash it.
Yeah, I think they'll notice. I hope they'll notice that it was an error.
Yeah.
So if it goes up, we can just say, look, take it down. It's not a meeting.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, it's hopefully this will be resolved by the end of the week. So I just have some finished things. So yeah. Cool. Are you Yeah, I agree. I'm happy to see that there is staff rolling out into this, and like that kind of gives people more of the ability to work on these projects full time, and like, that's really cool to see too.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
I'm excited about that.
The sort of the first phase of the life was thrashing around trying to work out what we were doing and how we were going to do it.
Yep.
And the second phase has mostly been sort of volunteer driven, or
Yep.
quasi volunteer, in the sense that a lot of the volunteers are actually being paid to carve out part of their job time.
Yes, right.
But really, that third phase, as I see it, is professionalization. So the actual, and that's kind of like a jumping from one local minima to another over a fairly big hump.
Yep. I agree. Are you are you part of the TAC in any way, or have you been avoiding the TACs?
No, I go to the TAC meetings. Not every time. They sometimes conflict with other meetings I have.
Yeah.
But I do try to keep an eye on it.
I have been less or more hesitant to join the TAC meetings, mostly because it seems like a lot of bureaucracy.
Yeah, there was a lot of work.
Interesting.
There was a lot of work on the mechanisms of administration. Yes.
Is that not the long-term plan, or is that basically its role?
No, that's not. That's not. I mean, that's not the intention that they would be working on the documents forever. They did want to complete it, and they've bedded some of them down, so that's good. So what's useful to me, and I will take credit for stealing this idea from elsewhere, I'm suggesting it, is regular updates from working groups. So each TAC meeting starts with 2 updates from different working groups.
So that keeps the information flowing around the organization, so it's not just silos that are. That I've seen that in previous company, like when I used to work for a former organization, because they were not cross pollination, meetings. Like people had no clue what other people were doing.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense.
I like to keep an eye on that. In fact, securing software repos is up tomorrow. I've got some a simple slide deck and to talk through.
Has somebody from Gradle continued to hang out there, or is that I used to work for Gradle, so I want to make sure that they continue to be involved in that conversation.
Yeah, we see Gradle folks pretty regularly.
Okay, good.
Maven folks, Gradle folks, PyPI in the form of Dustin. See Honda folks show up a lot. We've got fairly different times on alternating weeks, so the exact crowd varies. I'm in the sweet spot where I can attend both times.
Right. Have you out of curiosity, so you're focused on Ruby, right, primarily?
Yes.
Yeah. Did the Ruby ecosystem, so I mean my research back before, back in 2019 was around the widespread use of HTTP to resolve dependencies in the Java ecosystem, because prior to 2014, Maven Sonatype didn't Maven Central didn't support HTTPS without a donation to them. And so basically a bunch of build tools and old build systems got written using HTTP, and nobody ever upgraded their build infrastructure to use HTTPS. And so I found that was a widespread common security vulnerability across the Java ecosystem. Is that similar sort of like for the Ruby ecosystem? Do you guys have package verification, or is it is like for Java, the HTTPS was the only thing that you had to guarantee that you were getting what you got?
Yeah.
Is that a similar issue in Ruby or not?
So HTTPS is what gets served from rubygems.org. That's the
right. But is it something that is it the so in the Java ecosystem, you also had to specify it in your build tool to ask for whether you want HTTP or HTTPS. No, so I called it the single character typo, basically.
Yeah, no, the gem client will automatically go to HTTPS. I don't know when that became the case. I couldn't tell you. But certainly as long as I can remember.
That's good. The case.
in terms of package verification, there is a signing mechanism to first order approximation. Nobody uses it because it's a pain in the ass.
Yes. Yes. That's
which is
the same thing in the Java ecosystem. Yep.
Right. Which is why I'm so gung-ho. And like other package manager folks are so gung-ho about SigStore. It's just like, oh, wow, people could sign without
use it,
punching their own faces.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, of course, I don't think about signing keys as like a huge security boundary, and then you hear about Samsung and those big like what was the bunch of Android companies
Android.
they lost their signing keys, and you're like, in that particular context, that's not good. And then I was listening to Risky Business, and they're like, shouldn't those keys be in HSMs? And I'm like, yes, they should. SigStore. Well, that's not going to happen, because like if you're trying to make it easy, right, you can't have like hardware, you can't have hardware signing. And yeah, so like that, like you have like two conflicting things at that point that are like,
I see the value. I see the value in signing of, I mean, apart from, like your base authenticity and integrity sort of assurances. The main thing is that if the identity provided to SigStore, to Fulcio, is distinct from the package repo identity, then the attacker has to compromise 2 accounts and not 1 in order to push a signed artifact. And to me, that's very attractive.
Can you just do me like a quick, how does SigStore work? Like I keep hearing the name, I've seen some demos, but like what's the like TLDR, like, elevator pitch version of how SigStore works?
Well, the elevator pitch is that it turns a finicky, error-prone key management problem into a much more straightforward identity problem.
Okay. And the identity is you have a SigStore account and you have, what's the other account?
What happens is SigStore trusts Fulcio, which is the certificate issuing part of the system. Fulcio trusts a small set of identity providers to attest who you are. Okay. And then when it receives that attestation, it issues short-lived certificates for signing with that identity embedded. And then once you produce that, those certificates get written into a transparency log. Once you create the signature gets written into another transparency log. And that's what allows you to think. Because the keys are short-lived, you don't have to keep them. They're ephemeral.
Yep.
They never hit the disk. They get discarded as soon as the operation is over.
Yep.
And so, as I say, like instead of faffing about with having to protect your private keys and store them and decide where they go and when to rotate them and all that jazz, the key pops into existence, it does its job, and then it goes away.
So is Fulcio acting as a root cert, or do they have a root cert they're signing? Okay.
Yeah. So ultimately going back to a root cert in a tough system. So they descend from a tough root.
And where's the tough root? Who's the tough root?
Tough root, it's been done on a threshold scheme. I think 5 of 5 or 4 of 5.
I don't understand what that means.
Oh, in the sense that to change the root, you need a certain number of people who hold partial keys to agree to like perform partial commutations.
So it's okay. Like this is like the DNS one where Dan Kaminsky and a couple of other people had key. Okay, cool. That makes sense.
Very similar idea. I believe probably directly inspired.
Yeah. So who has? So is the root the thing that is the root signing, like the thing that is doing the signing, is that in the Fulcio, whatever Fulcio, who is Fulcio a company or an organization?
The root. No, so Fulcio is the software. The root is offline. That's sort of a big part of the tough architecture, is that the root is held offline. It's held offline and has a threshold like a threshold scheme. I can't remember the term. The signing key is like 2 or 3 certificates down in the hierarchy. Tough has like a hierarchy of certificates, and I can never remember which one does what. But the actual live online signing key is in full CO and gets rotated periodically.
The 3 parents, if any of the 3 parents get compromised, you could create fake one of these keys, correct? Or am I missing something?
Yes, you could. The thing to bear in mind, though, is that it'll still have to go in the log. So to me, the secret, one of the important things about SigStore is like, so my first elevator pitch was the turning key management into an identity problem. The second elevator pitch is make the attacker move in the open, right?
Yep.
And that's about the transparency log. So even if they do compromise Fulcio, they can't use it without leaving a trail, which allows the exact things that they affected to be tracked down later.
Yeah. But then the audit log has to be highly available.
Yes, that is true. That is the old story. It's the same as OSCP, you know, OCSP rather.
OCSP and OSP. Well, then there was OCSP stapling, which did what? I was
It was essentially you took the OCSP and you attach it to, you embedded it in the certificate. And there is something similar for recall for the transparency log. You can take an extract from it, and if you trust the key that recall uses, and if that ultimately you follow that chain of trust back up to that tough root.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense. Crypto is I have I've never actually tried to implement any of it, so all of the stuff that I know about it is all from things that I've learned through like podcasts and education and stuff like that. So I'm thinking that I'm following most of it, but it's still somewhat of a struggle at times.
Yeah.
So I think So the stapling mechanism you were saying.
Yeah, essentially you took what would be an OCSP response and jammed it into the certificate. It's been a long time. It's been a year or two since I thought about OCSP, so I can't remember the exact mechanism, but essentially you have something portable that doesn't require you to go back. It's an offline verification.
Yeah.
And you have a fallback to the online if you're not satisfied. The main problem with OCSP, of course, is that despite what everybody says, they prefer availability over everything else. And so if the OCSP is down, most browsers—
it fails open.
Yeah, fails open. Most of them fail open. And that being said, I think the economics are slightly different for module signing, because that's a much less frequent operation than visiting a web page. First of all, and second of all, it is more tolerable to have downtime. Like, I'm not saying it's like tolerable in a you know, an emotional or social sense, but I mean in terms of like, if you were going down to the dollars and cents of it, you can tolerate unavailability of the transparency log for longer than you would tolerate it for other things. On the theory that like, your builds get interrupted, but if they're interrupted for like 10 minutes, that's not a disaster. Right, which gives a lot of leeway in terms of like the availability budget that they have to levels they have to meet.
I agree until you're working until you talk to a DevOps person and you're like, no availability of my CI fight,
and
right.
Yeah, and I hear them, and they're welcome to join the on-call rotation.
Yeah, right.
or donate money towards the upkeep.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah.
How dare this free service not be available 100.0% of the time?
I know exactly. Yeah. Well, that's why organizations buy JFrog or Sonatype, right? Because then then those things are expected to be highly available. So I guess, is there a model where Sonatype and JFrog can mirror the transparency log so that then the availability of that service is not on you, but it puts that onus back on the organization that's running their own Artifactory instance?
I believe you could. Let me think about this for a second.
Because that's implementation detail. That's definitely what organizations are going to want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that ChainGuard, I think, just announced an offering at least for private SIG-store instances. I don't know whether it's meant to be like federated to the external one.
Yeah.
But I don't see a reason in principle why you couldn't mirror an upstream into a local.
Yep.
Actually, no. You would have to have two different instances. You would have to have one that mirrors the public and one that is just your own stuff. Because as soon as you mix them, you change all the hashes. Because it's a Merkle tree. The Merkle tree will be different from the public if you mix them together. What you could mix together into a single place is like in front of recall, there's a Redis instance that caches the key and the entry in the log. So rather than like recomputing the Merkle tree every single time you make a query, it goes to Redis. If it finds it there, it just sends it back to you because, in theory, it's you can test the integrity of that entry when it gets back to you. And that's what gets used for search and responses to queries.
As this gets more and more, as this gets used more and more, can you just slap a CDN in front of that and like call it a day for, I mean, obviously you need to invalidate the cache every once in a while, but like, could you select, all right, is there infrastructure to let you do that so that as this scales and gets hit more and more, you don't need to like have your Redis instance be responding to every single request?
So I think, that comes back to a discussion we've had in securing software repo groups, which is the format of extracts from the log and storing them side by side with the signature and side by side with the package. So they're just files on a system, and yes, you can use a CDN because that CDN capability is enormously important for package repositories. Right.
Yes. Having worked for Gradle, you serve petabytes of data per month.
Yeah, like, people CI systems people just do not cache.
No. And for correctness, at least for Gradle, for correctness, we didn't want you to do a ton of like there is some caching, but like we didn't want you to try to do your own caching too much because like there was a likelihood of you screwing it up.
Well, that's a whole other discussion, but CDNs. So RubyGems and PyPI, I know at least are using Fastly as a CDN, so they get donated CDN services.
Gotta tell Brian Fox that because Brian Fox spends millions. He said it's a six-figure number every year.
Actually, yes, it is a donation worth six figures at least. And I think that's mostly because they're non-commercial. I think in the case of Sonatype, it's like, well, you're making money off this, so you can afford it. I'm going to stay out of that conversation. They can sort that out amongst themselves. But CDNs are definitely a thing. So that idea of having a self-contained extract that can be served alongside the files that you retrieve alongside the files. And we had that when we did the Ruby design, we had that as like a later thing to do. It wasn't something we saw in the first couple of phases. But it is a thing we had to do like on our list of like progressively hardening up and simplifying the system. So like early on, when there's very few actual queries being made, it's acceptable to go back to recall and figure that out. But as soon as possible, we would want that ability to just pick up a file and read it out straight away. There was something else I was going to say, but I can't remember what it is. It's probably not important. So yeah, it's the design all makes sense. We just haven't had the bandwidth to work on it in Ruby world.
Right.
We basically reached a point where it's just like, okay, I have limited bandwidth available, and two big things that we could work on. One of which is signing and SIG-store, and one of which is MFA. And we basically said, based on the current prevalence of attacks, MFA is the bigger bang for buck.
Yeah, and I like that. I think that is like 100% valid, right? Because people are not. So how much evidence? Like, okay, the case of the Android attack, right? We saw keys being abused. for stupid reasons. It's like you saw how that, like you like, where did you hear about the news about the Android stuff getting stolen?
As usual, I heard people, I saw people making oblique references on Twitter and then figured it out from there.
Yeah, so Risky Business made the point that, and as did Security Now when they talked about it, they were like, yeah, like these signing keys that could be used to like sign like highly privileged Android software on these phones was being used for adware, or like, something like, it's like, if this had been owned by a like, a nation state, they would have used this stuff for such like more like targeted stuff, but it got used in such it got used for such a banal thing. It's like,
because the thing is, we don't know whether they have in fact obtained signing certificates.
Oh, right. Well, I mean,
it could be that these amateur jackasses have come along and spoiled it for everybody.
Yes, right, because they were so, but that indicates that they were so widespread across the black market that like anybody could have gotten them. Yeah.
I think that the thing I find my favorite people in the world, in terms of like security, are crypto miners and crypto jackers, because I joke that it's basically, contingency payment penetration testing, and it's quite cheap. And I like
I'm muting myself because I'm eating, but I'm laughing. You're not wrong.
No money down. Just pay me with some CPU cycles. And usually you notice it pretty quickly because one of your CPUs goes berserk.
Yeah, we had at a former employer that I had, someone ended up accidentally leaving some service open that has a feature that leaves it vulnerable to remote code execution by default. I don't remember what it is, but like, it's one of those like, why is this something that you can do just by default? But anyways, it was in a Docker container, and we ended up having to, for the first time ever in our organization, engage I was like, I don't think they've gotten any further, but they were running code inside of Docker container on these systems, and like, what other things could they have accessed? And we hired an incident response team, and they're like, doesn't look like they got outside the container. I'm like, perfect, but you never can, because like Docker containers are great pivot points for SSRF into like deeper into the deeper into an organization and stuff like that. So and we actually got an email from the German government too. It was really interesting. They're like, we had a crypto miner, and then also an email from the German government saying, hey, like, just a heads up, you've got a service that's got like a known vulnerability that's got a remote code execution vulnerability in it. And I was like, wow, the German government's on the ball. Like, they're like sending like, heads up, you have an exposed endpoint sort of stuff, and we got a crypto miner on it. But I was like, wow, like good for them.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know they did that.
Neither did I until that point where we got that email.
I used to, in a previous job, we had all of our CI and testing systems, and we were using a deployment system that's a little obscure, and I won't name it because it gives away what's going on. But it worked by basically replacing entire VMs. So it was a VM deployment system. It would, and it was very robust in terms of being able to get back to a clean state. And one day we realized that the documentation had a bunch of default passwords in it, and that what was happening is everyone was just copying the documentation example, and it worked. Right, it ran. And we declared the maximum severity incident we could, because we're like, we have literally no way of knowing who has logged into our systems illegitimately, and had a good old time. So the entire company had to burn the world down. But it was a good like test of that capability. Like we'd never had to do that before, and we managed to do it in 3 days.
Are these public credentials? Like, is this like the documentation in public, what people were using across the internet, or yeah,
it was public documentation. People were just like copying and pasting the YAML And so there were a few things where it said change password and other ones where it just had a default password. And the thing is that you were supposed to set all of the passwords. People saw that and went like, well, I guess it's okay to use the default because the other one says to change it and this one doesn't. Right. So people just copy pasted, set some passwords and off they went. And the particular password was like a health monitoring system, like a health endpoint type system, which had extremely high privileges because it could restart processes. Right. It could launch a process on a VM. And that was one of the ones that had the default password set. And it was just like, well, shit.
We had a former company of mine. It has a tool that lets you get insights into your build and whether, like, you know, when things fail, when things succeeds, and also captures logs and stuff like that of test runs. And this enterprise tool that we had will capture everything when things fail. And for the open source version, we exposed those logs to the public so that people could see whether or not their CI things were succeeding or failing. And of course, at one point, we realized that we were leaking some credentials into our CI logs. And then we go do a whole massive sweep. And then we realize, oh, wait, we have this other external auditing thing that keeps our logs too. And oh, what's in there? And those keys are ending up in there too. And it's like, oh, for the love of God. And the thing is, like, when you're running a CI/CD pipeline, right, you can put credentials into the CI/CD pipeline and it will, I mean, most modern CI/CD pipelines will do pattern matching and will scrub those from the logs.
Yeah.
But if you're sending those logs to an external system,
like
then
you can't, or something. Yeah.
Or this enterprise tool that gives you insights into your build infrastructure. You're not putting your credentials into that system because that thing doesn't need to authenticate to the systems. Only your build does. And so it doesn't know that it needs to be filtering those things out. And also, like, your build doesn't necessarily know what are credentials and what are not credentials, because it doesn't know what things are credentials and what things are not credentials, because, like, people read environment variables in that are credentials or stuff like that, right? So it can't even, actually, that's a really interesting feature.
It's funny you say that because Concourse has, I think, I can't remember if it was Concourse or if it was an additional plugin, but Concourse has a thing where if it sees a value that's the same as an environment variable, it blanks it out. So it just refuses to log anything that's an environment variable, because in Concourse,
that's an interesting solution.
The way you pass information to the tasks basically is through environment variables. Everything's done through environment variables.
What is Concourse? Is Concourse the build tool for Ruby?
No, I wish. No, it was a CI/CD tool. It still is a CI/CD tool. I shouldn't use the past tense. That sort of grew and evolved at Pivotal when I was there. And, like, there are things I would change about it. Like, I have, like anybody, I have, you know, annoyances and things I think that could have been done differently or whatever. But
yeah,
overall, it's the best system I've ever used by a country mile. Like, it's so elegant. The UI is so beautiful. It's just a shame it never took off. And of course, now with GitHub Actions, the entire zone is just a wasteland, right?
Well, for CI/CD,
they've just scorched the earth for everybody. There's no room, no oxygen left.
No, they killed. Well, Travis is already dying.
Yeah, Circle will be next.
Circle will be next. Well, Travis was dead because they got bought by that was you heard all the news and the sadness of I have a friend who was working at Circle. I was talking to a friend of mine who used to work at Circle and has Circle stock options, and she said, I really should have sold my options before, when there was one of those buyout options, because like these things are not going to be worth anything now. Like,
yeah,
yeah, and I mean Jenkins is holding its own, but that's open source, and I think that Jenkins will never die because people will always.
Jenkins has momentum, but basically for anything that's new, it's not going to get traction because GitHub Actions is free, and it's
at least
right
in the
there.
open source space. I'm curious what will happen in the closed source space, because like Bitbucket, Bitbucket has Atlassian, and they're building a bunch of things, but like
yeah, but their stuff is rubbish.
You're not
I did
wrong.
actually I did go to, and I feel bad saying that because I'm Australian, but generally speaking, the best Australian developers are not in Australia. Because that's not where the money is. But I did pitch to some VCs doing a startup around Concourse, and they sort of said, yeah, we can see this being like a 10, 20 or $50 million business. We're not interested.
Yeah.
Like they don't, fairly enough, they're not there to give a bank loan.
Yeah.
They're there to 10x or 100x their investment.
Yeah.
I just didn't see it happening.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. My amendment to that best engineers in Australia, or that are Australian or not in Australia, the only amendment to that I would give you is the best engineers that are Australian either are not in Australia or work remotely for a company from Australia.
Right.
Because I had Luke, the VP of engineering, one of the VPs of engineering at Gradle, and he is one of the best developers, engineer. Like he was like, he straddled a company. He was very eloquent and also kicked butt and could write a lot of code. Like he was very good. But he worked for a company remotely. And I actually had him as a manager for a little bit, and I live in Boston. I loved him as a manager. I would have him as a manager again in a heartbeat, but not if he was in Australia, because it's so difficult, to have managers with time separation there's that wide.
That's another reason why a lot of Australians leave, is that you're working remotely, but you're off kilter with everybody, especially the East Coast or Europe. You're just invisible. And it's even worse if you're on the West Coast of Australia. Which is another 3 hours further away. They don't even really have overlap with California, so they're just out there by themselves. They have overlap with like Singapore and Japan, and if China, coastal China. So if you're working in those areas, then sure, being on the West Coast of Australia is great, but that's not a lot of the tech market.
Nope.
It's not the top end of the tech market.
I have been, one of the things that I've been rather lonely the past couple of jobs. I've been operating kind of in a silo as a security researcher. The past several jobs. So when I was working for Gradle, I was the solo security person, and there was nobody else, at least till the very end. The Dan Kaminsky Fellowship, I've been kind of operating solo, and I have been really concerned. Like I've struggled because I feel like I'm not growing and improving my skills, because I'm operating in a silo. And so I've been trying to find a job that would let me have a team of people around me or something like that. And I've not totally succeeded, but I think that with the Open Source Security Foundation, there are enough intelligent security people around that I can learn from people. It's just, I would like to learn from other security researchers, and so I need to figure out where to bridge out from that. But I'm really hopefully lucky that my soon to be hopefully counterpart working at this job will be in the same time zone as me. She'll be in Florida, and so that will be like a breath of fresh air, because I've had a lot of coworkers in Europe and California and stuff like that, and like having someone solidly in your own time zone you can jam out with, you can program. Yeah, you can work with all day, and like then you can go, have a night and not feel like you're leaving them or having to, because like I would be sitting down in meetings with with Luke in Australia at 5 p.m. at night, and I'd be like, I want to go sailing, I want to go, I want to go skiing or whatever, and like I can't because I've got to meet with him, or like we'd start really early in the morning. I've had some really good relationships with people in Australia though. Like the coach that I had for Black Hat, she was in Australia, and she was awesome because she just I said, like, this is going to be heinous for the both of us. Like, let's just figure out a time to meet that's like, even though it's not within working hours, it just makes us one of us like us happy. And so we managed to get it to work. But like, yeah, like great people, wonderful people, really intelligent people, and just very kind, but heinous time zones. What is your history? How did you end up where you ended up? Like, what got you to where you?
Oh, you're frozen.
Time on things that value per se to the bottom line of what they make money on.
So how did I wind up at, I only caught some of that. So how come I'm working at Shopify on this?
Yeah, how did you end up working at Shopify, but also how did you position yourself into a position in an organization where you're adding value, but the value you add is not necessarily directly correlated to it's not the top line. It's not, and you'll have to excuse me, I'm going to mute you while you talk because I want to continue eating and I don't want you to hear me slurping. Sure. But I am curious how you got there, and how you also, not only that, but also how do you continue to sell yourself and justify your own job in a way to make sure that you don't get fired, but you still show that value to the organization.
Yeah. So I wound up at Shopify. When I was at VMware, I was sort of over it for various reasons, and I started looking for a job. I looked at Shopify because one of my former managers had gone to Shopify, who I admired and respected very much, and so I was like, okay, it can't be all bad. So I applied, and I got the job, and at first it wasn't super clear what my role would be. There was sort of like a thrashing period before we settled down on this mission. And it mostly comes down to Shopify deals in like billions of dollars and millions of merchants, and most of 1 billion people who bought something from those merchants. We have scads and scads of sensitive data that would be attractive to nation states. We have so much money flowing through the platform that we're attractive to ransomware operators. Those are the two ones I worry about, who are prepared to like go, this is worth the time, especially nation states. They'll take the time. And it's like, if you manage to subvert one of the hundreds and hundreds of gems that we rely on across our estate, you're inside the process. We tend towards monoliths. So you get inside the process and you can see everything and do everything. And Ruby is so flexible and so dynamic that there's no way to defend pieces of code in one module from another piece of code in a different module. Right? You can walk the entire object graph if you want. So that's the main thing about it. Like we have a similar risk in terms of JavaScript, but we're mostly hanging back and letting GitHub do the running.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen like MageCart being popular. Is MageCart, has MageCart died, or is that still a thing that people are doing?
I don't know what it is.
MageCart?
Yeah.
MageCarting is you compromise some sort of supply chain in the JavaScript ecosystem, and then you manage to get code running in the JavaScript in the checkout process, and then you scrape credit cards. So I think that's traditionally what's called MageCarting, and it's like happened to some high profile organizations. Like it happened to one of the big European train companies. It happened to Newegg. Newegg got MageCarted. They didn't even, I think they like barely announced it. Like they did a really they really tried to suppress that they got mage carded. But yeah, it's either the CDN that you're serving your JavaScript from gets popped, or one of your JavaScript endpoints gets popped, or something like that. But basically, they end up getting persistence and running code persistently inside of your website.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess the best defense there would be something like resource integrity.
Well, they're compromising. Well, yes, if you're not hashing the file prior to creating the HTML that you're sending up, because they're mostly going for the file. Like if they're going after your file right inside of your environment, then you might be hashing that file prior to creating the HTML to send to your user. If you're serving it from a CDN, then hopefully you're using, a hash that's known, and then yes, you would be good there.
Although then that pushes it back to, if they can compromise the server process, they can just serve anything in the HTML in a script tag.
Yes. Well, the other one, I mean, it goes through, I mean, like mage carders will go for a lot of different things. Like they'll also like, your marketing people would love to put those like Salesforce things in all of this, like in those things, like you're just, I mean, most of the time when you're using those Salesforce things, you're just pointing to a JavaScript endpoint, and those, like, that's not version, because Salesforce loves being able to push out updates, and they will tell you don't use a don't use a, well, I actually don't know if their current suggestion is, but like I don't think that Google, or like when you copy the thing from Google, or if you copy the thing from Salesforce, they don't ship that copy paste thing with the sub resource integrity tag, because I believe they want the opportunity to update it behind the scenes for you without having you have to do anything. Yeah, I think that I could be wrong. Don't quote me, and especially if it's getting recorded and uploaded, don't quote me there either. But I think that the way that, if I remember correctly, the way that New Egg got compromised was via one of those SEO sort of, not SEO, sorry, one of those marketing tools, JavaScript code things that was running.
Yeah, I think that's more of a problem for our merchants when they customize their checkouts, which you can do quite a lot. There's the traditional way was that it was a templating language called Liquid. And so you would copy and paste a chunk of Liquid into your template. And I imagine that there have been cases of mage coding there, and I imagine trust and safety have that on their radar. Mine is mostly
gems.
How does a bad gem reach production? How does outside malicious code reach production is essentially my job, and making it harder and harder for that to happen is what I focus on. So that's why I come back to, okay, in terms of prevalence of attacks, currently account takeover is the most common, so we need MFA. Once MFA becomes widespread, they will change tactics. They will start moving towards attacking the repository. So we need to be prepared to put signing in place and then follow up with tough. And then by that time, the landscape will change again, and we'll see where we're at.
So I presume that because the barrier on compromising 2FA is so much lower currently, people are not going after signing as an attack vector. If they see a package that uses signing, they just don't even try.
The big one is typo squatting by a wide margin. Typo, combo, brand jacking, right? Like those are the most common attacks numerically. There's not much we can do about that. We're working with our package vendor to get a allow listed proxy so we can protect ourselves. There's not a lot we can do for the community, although, if it occurs to me, we might try to get some researchers going to be better at identifying those cases. But account takeover is the second most common, and it's so here's the thing, like typo squatting is casting a wide net and seeing what you catch. Like, it's a game of numbers, and it's very hard to do it discreetly because you have to cast hundreds of packages to get any kind of meaningful yield, right? Right, because each package, only a few people make that mistake. out of the thing, and you've got to slowly accrete people making that mistake to start getting access to systems. So what they'll do is they'll spray out hundreds of packages at once, and they've gotten quite elaborate in trying to conceal that they're doing this, but it's been, so far they've been picked up. The most elaborate I've seen is PyPI got attacked by an attacker who created several dozen accounts. They rotated IPs, they randomized the times at which they created the packages. Right, so they did a whole bunch of things to conceal that they were spraying out hundreds of packages, but they still sprayed out hundreds to try and capture lots and lots of typos, because each one only gets you a little bit, only a tiny increment. So I think that's one thing, but an account takeover has much higher impact, because if they achieve an account takeover on a highly relied upon dependency, they immediately get access to an enormous amount of stuff.
Yes.
And you know, if they can, one tactic I saw, this was, I think, Colors.js, they did this, or UA.js, I can't remember, but it was essentially they created it was like they had the 1.9 version existed, and they created like 1.95, which was the malicious version, and then they immediately released version 2.0. So if you went to look at the source code, first off, you would see source code that looked fine. Right? Unless you dug, you wouldn't think. But everybody in their log files has it set as like 1.9x is the version I want. It picks the latest off the shelf, and they get the malicious one. So unless you knew how to check it, you wouldn't notice that it was going on. So account takeover is like, you know, we're working on the typo squatting because, you know, we have thousands of developers. Some of them are going to make mistakes. But the account takeover is the one I worry the most about, because it doesn't take very long to have enormous penetration. And if the attackers are on the ball, like if they have a team standing by curating what comes through the door, picking targets and attacking them immediately, like taking immediate action, then you could basically find yourself popped very quickly.
Yes. And developers, I mean, I don't know about you, but having worked in previous organizations, like developers hate running, you know, anti-malware, like all that stuff on their machines, because at the minimum, it slows down your CI/CD development cycle significantly. So like, have the payloads, I mean, I've seen a lot of stuff like, you know, have we seen the actors that drop payloads into, like, the people that are actually trying to pivot through the organization doing things, are most of the attacks at this point the people that are just running code and extracting information and not gaining, like, I guess, are the actors achieving persistence?
I couldn't say. I don't recall people talking about that. I think what usually happens is the package gets reported and then nobody owns up to having been popped by it. Because the packages do have a pretty simple there's a sort of a standard sort of approach where you have the code that runs, and one or two things happens. Either it's code that's intended to reach production and operate there, and it'll basically open a web shell. It'll pull in a payload from other server and bootstrap its way up to usually a web shell. The other kind is something whose job it is to exfiltrate credentials, and that's either something that's meant to run during CI, so it's code that they know will execute during CI. They look for environment variables and select them out. But the other one that's become quite common is stuff that's intended to attack the developer at their workstation. So some, like PyPI has setup.py, Node has post install hooks. So they'll run a script that basically looks in your home directory looking for AWS credentials, SSH keys, all that kind of stuff, and slips that out and ships it off. Because developers often have, you know, highly privileged access to various things that can be pivoted from. Look, I'm going to nick off because I want to have coffee before my next call.
No, I get it. Yeah, this has been really interesting, though, and I really appreciate this. And I've also gotten to get to know you a little bit better, which I really appreciated. So thank you for spending the time to chat with me. I really appreciated it.
No worries. And remember, everybody who's watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment, tell us what you thought about it.
Yep. All right, Jacques, have a wonderful rest of your day, and good luck keeping the internet safe out there.
No worries. You too. I'll see you later.
All right.
Bye.
See you later. Bye.